Now conflicts are piling one on top of the other because you're triggered, how you approach might trigger the other person, and now there's two people who are triggered and not able to actually hear what each other is saying. Hi, my name is Chelsea, and welcome to Collective Self. Collective Self is a group of intentional individuals who come together for healing, joy, community, and self-improvement. If those things interest you, I invite you to join our community by clicking like and subscribing, and also joining our Facebook group at Collective Self. All the information will be put in the description box below. And with that, let's get started. I have my notes down here, so if you see me looking down, that's why. And so I wanted to talk about why we need to have a different sort of lens when it comes to resolving conflicts with the people that we love. And for one, I notice that often, especially in familiar relationships, right? And these are relationships that may be reciprocal, right? So we want to be in a relationship, the person wants to be in a relationship with us. Think about maybe a sister that you get along with, but that sometimes you have tension with, a brother, perhaps even a parent, right? And we're not talking about relationships that are toxic for you to be in, but we're talking about relationships that we have both actively chosen to be a part of and are happy to be a part of. Sometimes when we have those relationships, we can get into conflict, and we will wait for time to pass and then revisit the relationship without ever really acknowledging, like, hey, this thing that you did hurt me, or this thing that you said, it made me feel bad, or any of those things. And we take time past for apologies, right? And we say that, oh, well, in this situation, this person came back and they made me a plate of food, or they came back and they bought me a present. And that is, that's it. We don't acknowledge the conflict. We don't acknowledge what we would have liked to have happened. And we don't acknowledge how we felt when the thing happened. And that really leaves a lot of room for resentment to build. And I don't think that's necessarily a healthy way to deal with it. Because I guess we want to repair the relationship and we miss the relationship, it might feel good. It might feel comforting to sort of jump back into the relationship and never acknowledge that what caused the rift in the first place. But I think that in being vulnerable and being able to share how you would like to be treated and being able to speak up for yourself and to talk to others around us, our relationships are strengthened. Sometimes we don't acknowledge these things because we really don't have a trust that this person will receive us. And so that's really the root of this video is creating space to be received and also to receive others. Another thing I wanted to mention is that punishment for harm caused is not necessarily restorative justice. And let me give you an example of this. Oftentimes, if we are somebody who is going out of our way to express that we felt hurt by something that somebody did, we don't actually approach it from a lens of, hey, this is what this made me feel, and this is what I want to happen in the future. Oftentimes, we want the other person to feel bad about themselves, about what they did, and to make them a punching bag for our emotions and our feelings, to make us feel better. But in reality, in doing that, not only are you sort of acting from your ego in a place of how do I put it? When we make others a punching bag for our emotions and we pass judgments on them, we're essentially saying, you're a bad person because you did this to me, and I want you to know that you're a bad person because you did this to me. As opposed to saying, hey, the action that you did made me feel sad, angry, upset, unloved, disappointed, and here's how I would like you to move in the future. And I think it's really important to have that distinction, because as much as it can feel good to sort of wield our power, especially when we know somebody loves us and cares about us, that is never going to strengthen your relationship. Oftentimes, when others hurt us, they're not intentionally trying to do so. And when you are not given an opportunity to reconcile that situation, and instead are only given the option to be the punching bag for somebody else's emotions, that can really damage the relationship. Right now, we're going to talk about what accountability looks like if you are the person who was the aggressor, right? So the aggressor, it doesn't necessarily mean that you meant to hurt somebody or that you went out of your way to offend someone or hurt their feelings. What it simply means is that as the aggressor, you're the person who caused harm, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So as the aggressor, our first key point is that we need to be able to hold space. Oftentimes when somebody will come up to you and say, hey, can I talk to you? This really hurt my feelings. Our first response is to defend. I'm not a bad person. I didn't mean to. That wasn't my intention. And that all might be valid. But when somebody is coming to us and saying that we caused harm to them, it's really important that we're able to hold space for that. Not because we're a bad person, but because we love and care about this person and we want to understand where they're coming from. As the person who the conflict is being brought to, it's really our job to actively listen and not really defend our intentions or our character. And that might take place by taking a few deep breaths, maybe writing down what they're saying, and then maybe responding to how you're feeling at a later time, because really the intention is to hold space for the other person. And if you do have something that you want to bring up, now is not the time to bring it up. Your time will come where you get to share exactly what your intentions were and maybe why you did something that was received a certain way. But right now, this is your time to actively listen, to hear the person out, and to put yourself in their shoes. We also need to be able to take criticism without personalizing it. Often when somebody is telling us that we could do something better, we take it as a complete judgment about who we are or what we deserve or what our intentions were. It's rarely the case where somebody is actively attempting to judge us as a whole. Really, oftentimes when people are using these judgment words, they are trying to tell us how things made them feel. We should be able to take criticism without feeling shame or guilt. And this also might require you to do a little bit more self-work. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is how we should apologize, right? We need to be able to apologize without using self-absolving language, right? And this comes back to our ability to take accountability for our part in a situation. So we don't want to apologize and say, I'm sorry that you felt that way. We want to say, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Because in that way, you're able to acknowledge your place in that person's life and your place in the situation. And when we apologize, we're able to humble ourselves and take accountability for those things, even when they were not our intention. Your reconciliation is not a punishment for you, but an act of love and care for the other person. And I think it's really important to make that distinction because sometimes we expect that when we mess up, then we need to be punished. We put ourselves in situations where we're doing things that are to our detriment because we believe that we deserve to be punished for whatever harm we've caused. And that is not beneficial to anybody either, because this creates a power imbalance. And the purpose of nonviolent communication and of really being held accountable is not to create a power imbalance, but to share power between two parties and to really create deeper trust and intimacy and longevity for our relationships. So now let's move on to what accountability looks like for the person that was hurt. And this really boils down to nonviolent communication, right? Oftentimes when we're in the height of our emotions, it is really hard to use nonviolent communication because sometimes we just want to get back at the other person for whatever we think they did or whatever they did do. Nonviolent communication really hinges on what the facts are of a situation, how it made us feel, and what we would like moving forward. And communicating that in a way that, doesn't impose our story or our judgments on another person. So when we communicate nonviolently, we really want to separate the story that we told ourselves. For example, let's say I have a friend, and her name is Jane, and I'm at her house and I'm hungry. And Jane decides to order food, but she doesn't order any food for me. Okay, that's the actual story. Now the story I could tell myself is, Jane is so selfish. She doesn't care about me, and she didn't ask if I'm hungry because she only cares about herself. And she's always like this, right? That's an entire story that I fabricated. In reality, it could be that Jane maybe thought that I would eat when I got home, or that I'd eat before I got there. It could be that Jane didn't even really think about it, right? Which is not great, but it's not malicious, right? And those are all the stories that, or not stories, but those are all other possibilities than what the story that I fabricated in my head. And so when I come to Jane and I say, hey, Jane, I would like to talk to you. I'm not going to say, Jane, I know you don't care about me because you didn't order me any food and you didn't even ask me if I wanted anything, right? What I will say is, hey, Jane, when you ordered food, you didn't get anything from me. That is exactly what happened, right? And you didn't ask me. I could also add that you didn't ask and you didn't order anything from me. Now that is the truth of the statement, of the situation. Another thing that's important as the person who is feeling that harm is done to them is to know when you're ready to speak. Oftentimes when our emotions are heightened, we can go into conversations with the feeling of, I just want to get this over with. I just want to talk, and I don't necessarily want to stay in this energy of being upset, frustrated, disappointed, or X, Y, and Z. But we don't really give ourselves the opportunity to, one, acknowledge what actually happened, to two, decompress, reset our nervous system, and get to know exactly what happened for us, like what happened, what triggered us, what story are we telling, and what we want to happen differently. When we jump straight into a conflict, or speaking about a conflict right after it's happened, without giving ourselves the chance to decompress from it, it can really create a situation in which now conflicts are piling one on top of the other because you're triggered, how you approach might trigger the other person, and now there's two people who are triggered and not able to actually hear what each other is saying. So you should really take stock of when you're ready to have a conversation versus when you're not ready to have a conversation. Similarly, we need to understand our own needs, boundaries, and desires moving forward, right? And so not only are we taking the time to decompress, but we're also taking the time to say, hey, this is exactly what I want moving forward, and really falling in alignment with that. One of the last things that I want to point out as the person who feels like harm was done to them is that people may not respond in the way that you want them to. And we can't control other people's responses. The only thing that we can control is our character and how we choose to respond. So no conversation can go exactly as planned, exactly as you want, but that doesn't mean that this tool is not good when used with somebody who is open and receptive to improving their communication, or somebody who simply loves you and cares for you. So the steps of nonviolent communication are as follows. So number one, you're going to state what happened in 1 to 2 sentences without character judgments or without the story behind it. So for example, Jane, when you ordered food, you didn't ask me if I wanted anything and you didn't order anything for me, right? That is exactly what happened. Notice that I didn't call Jane a bitch. Notice that I wasn't mad at Jane and said, well, Jane, you don't care about me. Jane, you're selfish. I simply stated exactly what happened as it happened. Number two, you're going to identify how this made you feel, right? Because oftentimes when we try to come up with solutions, sometimes we negate the feeling part of it. But as humans, we all have feelings, and it's okay to address and acknowledge how we feel. And so when Jane didn't order me food, it made me feel frustrated and disappointed. It made me feel sad, and I'm still hungry. Not that hungry is a feeling, but isn't it? Yeah, so you're going to choose 3 to 4 words that describe how you feel and acknowledge how you feel. After this, you're going to acknowledge your core needs and your values, right? So I have a need for food, and I also want to be considered, and I feel like I want that reciprocity and being nurtured, right? So what I could say is, I felt this way because of my need for food and because I value reciprocal nurturing and I value being considered in my relationships. And finally, you're going to ask for what you want, right? And this is a request, not a demand, because we don't need to demand anything. We're not exerting control over anybody. What we're really saying is, hey, I've been able to acknowledge a need that I have, and I want to know if you're willing to meet it, right? And this also gives the other person a chance to meet you where you're at, and not necessarily respond to a threat, but respond from a place of genuine love and care for you. And so now you're going to say, hey, Jane, in the future, would you be willing to ask me, um, before you order food or when you're ordering food, or order me something that you know I'll enjoy, right? And Jane can say, yeah, that's fine, Chelsea, I can do that. Or Jane can say, well, no, I don't want to do that because I don't want to deal with that. And then you decide where you go from there. So what if somebody is not receptive to your nonviolent communication? That's a great question, because sometimes people are not receptive to it. And really what it comes down to is this relationship worth it enough for you to table this and come back to it on a different day? Sometimes it might be that they just simply don't have the space to hold space for you right now. But you could return to the conflict at a later date. I would suggest within the next 2 to 3 days, just so it doesn't fall through the cracks or become unclear what the conflict was actually about. But I would say even up to a week to 2 weeks, depending on your schedules and your availability. Something else to consider when we don't get the response we want when using nonviolent communication is to check our own energy. Are you open to a reality where things go well for you, right? Are you receptive to that? You might want to try scripting, which can really benefit your relationships if you're struggling to see somebody in a different light. Or the practice of Ho'oponopono, which is a restorative justice technique which was created in Hawaii back in the day and was really central to having strong relationship within the island because they had such an interconnected ecosystem of people and purpose. Ho'oponopono was a very beautiful practice that they used to do. And you can try this with the person, or you can try it by yourself in the intention to use this on the relationship itself. As people who are intentional about manifesting, it is important to note that sometimes people don't respond in the way that we want them to, but there is always the option for them to respond in the way that we want them to. So consider that as well. If you experience somebody who's emotionally hijacking the situation, it might be important to just very clearly state, hey, I came to you first with an issue that I'm having with you, and we can get to you at a later time. But right now, this is really about me and how I'm feeling and how I would like our relationship to go. And lastly, if they continue to insist on emotional hijacking past the first or maybe even the second time, it's important for you to then move accordingly. This doesn't mean punishing the other person and further damaging the relationship. This can simply mean taking a step back, or stating very clearly, hey, this is what I expected of our relationship, and you are not living up to these expectations. When you're ready to live up to these expectations, I'll be here, or I won't be here, because I feel hurt by what you've done, and you've shown me that you're not willing to hold space for me, or that you simply can't hold space for me. And that's okay too. Every time we have a conflict with somebody does not mean that we're going to have a smooth and easy resolution to it. Sometimes people need to leave our lives. And sometimes that might be for a small hiatus or indefinitely. So now that we've gone through our conflict and we've used our nonviolent communication, now is the time for intentional reconciliation. You really want to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that this is coming from a place of care and love for the other person and not from a place of fear, anger, or trying to control the outcome. And so this could be moving to show them their love language. It could be apologizing again when things settle down. It could be apologizing in person if this happened online or over the phone. This could be a meaningful note or a gift. This can mean creating intentional space for intimacy or quality time. Or even space, giving them some space to feel how they feel, without necessarily having to be around you and sort of stifle it. Find that often this can really give leeway for softness and for those emotions to dissipate, and then for you to come in and to show up in a different way moving forward. Another thing that I think is important to mention is that the person who the conflict is being brought to, after they apologize, I think it really is important that they have a space to possibly explain where a behavior might have come from. Oftentimes, we don't necessarily know what will trigger somebody else or what might hurt somebody else. And our intention is important, although we are being held accountable for harm caused. We should also get the opportunity to explain where we're coming from. And this can really create a sense of trust and mutuality in the relationship, right? So not only does the person who's bringing up the conflict have a chance to have themselves heard and their feelings addressed and acknowledged and apologized for, but we also have the chance to express where we're coming from if we are the person who is seen as the aggressor in the situation. We don't want to just simply make one person's perspective of the situation be the end all be all, right? But if somebody is coming to us and explaining that they do have a problem with us, right, we want to hold space for them, but we also do want to have space for us to explain our part in the situation after we've acknowledged their conflict with us. Guys, guys, we made it. We made it to the end of the video. If you've made it to the end of the video, congratulations, and thank you for being here, watching to this point. I really do hope you got a lot out of it. I do have some resources for you. Down below, I have a nonviolent communication packet from the Center of Nonviolent Communication to give you a little bit more context around how nonviolent communication can be used. And I also have a worksheet that I created to help you to outline nonviolent communication if this is a new process for you. As you get a little bit more familiar with it, you may or may not want to continue using it. But if this is new to you, it probably will be a very beneficial tool and resource for you. And it's downloadable, completely free. Everything is free, so I invite you to check that out. Once again, I invite you to join our intentional community over on Facebook at Collective Self. I really do hope you got a lot out of this video. Comment below one thing that you need to hold yourself accountable for during conflict. It might be something that you've already begun working on or something that you're just beginning to work on. But either way, it's important that we're able to call ourselves in and not call ourselves out. And thank you for being a part of Collective Self. I love you. I'll see you later. Bye.